Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We're honored to have with us Casey Luskin. He's with staff, research director, I believe, with the Discovery Institute. He's an attorney, but also has graduate degrees in science and law, giving him expertise in both the scientific and legal dimensions of the debate over evolution. Earned his BS and MS in Earth Sciences from the University of California, San Diego, and studied evolution extensively there. And the graduate and undergraduate levels, his law degree from the University of San Diego. He focused his studies there on First Amendment law. Like I said, as research director at the Discovery Institute, but also assists those that are attacked for teaching theories critical of evolution, and appreciate his work in that field. Casey, welcome to the Joe Miller Show. Thank you for being willing to talk about this important issue.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that I confronted early on in my academic career, I went to Yale Law School, supposedly one of the top law schools in the country, and I grew up Christian family, had a number of different scientific journals and books available to me growing up, and so had a pretty well-rounded, I thought, scientific background on the issue of evolution versus creationism, and pretty well-versed. And one of the things that was very convincing to me in this whole debate was when you're talking about evolution, there's an Achilles heel to the whole theory, and that is the idea of going from simplicity to complexity. You know, mutation doesn't provide more complexity. This is just something at a very basic level. And I remember talking to probably a dozen different peers, classmates at law school, and asking them how they reconciled their belief in the theory with these significant shortcomings. And nobody could offer anything other than this idea of reciprocal respect. Look, I'm an expert in my field. I'm going to give reciprocal respect to, the evolutionists, the paleontologists. I'm going to trust them. But nobody could offer response to any of the criticisms that I brought up. They just basically took at face value what they had been taught. And the same thing replayed when I got my advanced economics degree and talking to people that had more of a science background as opposed to a legal background. My son, recently just graduated from university, he found that in his undergraduate program, that debate on the issue of evolution versus intelligent design creationism completely excluded in the classroom. I think our audience would love to hear from you what the issues are, why they should consider intelligent design to be a competitive, if not the best theory to explain origins. And then we'll kind of get into the First Amendment issues maybe in the second segment.
Sure. Well, I appreciate everything you're saying, and I think that certainly your experience is a very common one. I can't tell you how many times I've been dialoguing with people, and they will say, look, I don't have I don't want to question the experts. I want to just basically let them think for me. I don't want to think for myself. And if they say that evolution is right, then that's what I have to believe. Well, that's exactly what, basically the Darwin lobby wants you to think. They don't want you to think for themselves. They want you to go along with what they're saying. And that's why whenever we deal with this issue in public schools, they always try to exclude from students any mention of the scientific evidence that challenges Darwinian evolution. They don't want students to know that evidence exists. So, okay, what is intelligent design, and what is some of the evidence for it? Would you like me to go through that, I guess, real quick?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Sure. So intelligent design is a scientific theory which says that many aspects of life in the universe are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than an undirected cause like natural selection. And intelligent design begins by trying to find in nature the kind of information and complexity which in our experience comes only from intelligence. So what do we mean by that? Well, in our experience, intelligent agents generate something called high levels of complex and specified information. Essentially, something is complex if it's unlikely, and it's specified if it matches some pattern. So right now, as you hear me speaking, I'm saying, sound waves are coming out of your radio that are very unlikely, yet they match a pattern that conforms to the English language. And so you instantly recognize them as being designed. And we use this sort of design detection all the time in our everyday lives. When you're walking along a path in a forest, you come across a circle of stones, and that circle of stones, inside of it is some charred wood with some ash, and there's some smoke rising from the center of it. And you say, okay, in my experience, when I see a circle of stones with charred wood and ash and smoke, that shows that somebody made a campfire. And so you infer that a campfire, some intelligent agent made a campfire there in that circle of stones. So we can detect design all the time in our everyday experience. So what intelligent design theorists are saying, can we look at biology and other aspects of nature, cosmology, physics, and see evidence of the kind of information and complexity which in our experience comes only from intelligence. So what happens when we look at biology? Well, we look at DNA, and we find that in our DNA is a language-based digital code that is rich in information. The nucleotide sequence in your DNA has to be just right in order to yield functional protein. In fact, computer superstars and gurus like Bill Gates have compared our DNA to a computer program because basically it contains computer-like programming and commands which instruct the machinery of your cell how to interpret the information in your DNA in order to provide some kind of a useful output. And so then what is that output? What are our cells doing with the information in our DNA? Well, that information is being converted into proteins, which then form molecular machines. And so your cells are literally full of thousands of different kinds of microscopic molecular machines that in many respects function like human design machines that are running around your cells, performing all kinds of important cellular functions. Okay, so what do we see?
Some of those machines, when they're observed, under electron microscopes, actually reflect mechanical components. It's fascinating. I saw one of the Moody Bible Institute videos of, and this was a bacteria. It was not an internal cell function, but like a cogwheel inside of one of these particular organisms that it was examining. I mean, it's fascinating to look at it actually in a visual sense and see what appears to also be reflective of not just some sort of random process, but of a design sequence.
That's absolutely right. Many of these micromolecular machines resemble human design machines. Some of them have the design of a rotary engine, and they have rotors and stators and propellers and U-joints and brakes and clutches. But they do this using, protein parts at the molecular level. And by the way, these protein-based molecular machines, they outperform any human design machine when it comes to energetic efficiency. I mean, when you want to talk green energy, these are far more efficient at using energy than anything that humans have built. So these are really fascinating, intricately complex machines inside of our cells and all living organisms. So what is at the heart of life? What we see at the heart of life is our DNA contains a language-based digital code that basically encodes computer-like commands, which are then interpreted by our cellular machinery through a computer-like system of information processing to produce microscopic machines. Where in our experience do digital-based, language-based digital code, computer-like information processing, and machine-like structures come from? In all of our experience, those things come only from intelligence. Yes, that is what is at the heart of life.
Well, I appreciate that discussion. And, of course, people that then go ahead and proffer that as a competitive theory to the dominant theory of evolution end up getting hit, sometimes fired, terminated from position, given bad grades. That's an area that you're working on in your practice of law. We'll talk more about your experience in the courtroom after these messages. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Group Tax Defense Attorneys, BeatIRS.com or 1-800-BEAT-IRS. That's BEAT IRS, BEAT-IRS, defending freedom since 78, rescuing Americans from IRS tyranny. We're on with Casey Luskin. He's an attorney, graduate degrees in science and law. Gives him expertise in both science and the legal dimensions of the debate over evolution, intelligent design. Last segment talking about some of the science behind intelligent design. We're going to talk this segment a little bit more about that and then get into some of the legal battles that have taken place between those advocating for intelligent design in the classroom and those that say, hey, we aren't going to hear that debate. Casey, I appreciate you staying with us. During the break, we also talked a little bit about the debate between Ken Hamm and Bill Nye, the science guy. I think that was last year. I watched the debate, wasn't real happy with it. You mentioned you thought it was a lost opportunity, and I kind of tend to agree with that. Why?
Yeah, well, I think most folks who watch that debate will come off with the impression that Bill Nye has all the science on his side for sort of materialistic, unguided evolution, and Ken Hamm, who is representing sort of the non-evolutionary view, his argument amounted to, well, the Bible says this. And me as an intelligent design proponent, I know that the science is overwhelmingly on the side of intelligent design, and I thought it was unfortunate that people didn't see a lot of that scientific evidence for intelligent design showcased during that debate. I think somebody who maybe was more focused on the science than Ken Hamm could have showed people that, wow, the science really does support intelligent design, and this is not an argument where you have to come from religion to see that there's evidence for design in nature.
Right, and I don't disagree with you on that. I mean, it was because it was such the setting, of course, was secular. I mean, this was promoted far and wide. I mean, I'm not sure how many viewers there were, but it was in the hundreds of thousands. And my assessment, of course, I believe the Bible. I'm a Christian unabashedly, but the science is clearly in support of intelligent design. And in fact, I've long said, and publicly, even in a debate against Lisa Murkowski for the U.S. Senate in 2010, and I've said this before too, I mean, evolution effectively, and I don't think anybody is going to debate as to whether or not organisms change. I think that there's pretty good evidence of adaptation. There's pretty good evidence of change. The problem fundamentally is, if you're looking at the theory that supposedly provides an explanation for all, it forces you to shut your brain off, because you can never get beyond the simplicity to complexity step. And of course, there's so much more now that you were pointing out in the last segment. And I'd like you to just continue briefly on that before we get into kind of the legal implications of those that decide to stand up for intelligent design. But what were some of the other things that you believe make it quite clear that intelligent design has good rational scientific support?
Sure. We covered previously some of the biological evidence for design, language-based digital code in our DNA, computer information processing in our cells, molecular machines all over biology. In our experience, those kinds of things only come from intelligence. But there's also great evidence for intelligent design from physics and cosmology, and I can keep this real brief, but basically discoveries of the last 50 or 60 years in physics and cosmology have shown that the physical laws and constants of the universe are finely tuned to allow for life. In fact, if they were just slightly different, things like the speed of light or the mass of the electron or the initial entropy of the universe, if many of the physical laws and constants were just slightly different, we cannot have life as we know it in the universe. In fact, we couldn't even have life at all, because in many cases, if the laws were slightly different, you wouldn't even have matter, or you wouldn't have galaxies or stars, things that are absolutely necessary for life. So when we look at the universe, it seems as if it was purposefully designed in order to be a habitable place for life to exist. And I think that's a powerful argument for design.
Well, and in fact, there's also been some studies that suggest that where we are placed within, for example, not just the solar system, but within the universe as a whole, makes our position ideal for observation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you watched the Cosmos series last year with Neil deGrasse Tyson, he tried to put out this false materialistic idea that, our planet is lost in some little corner of the galaxy and we don't need anything. But actually, our position in the galaxy is exactly where you'd want to be, both for life and for making astronomical observations. If we were further into the center, there'd be too much radiation. If we were further out, you would not have enough heavy metals to allow for planets to exist. And the fact that we're between two of the spiral arms in our galaxy means that there is a lot less dust, and that is what makes it possible for us to make all these amazing observations of the universe. So Neil deGrasse Tyson was simply wrong when he claimed that our position in the galaxy doesn't matter. It's actually very important both for life and for doing science.
Yeah, extraordinary. So for those that have the courage, because it really does take that in today's really limited academic environment on this issue, for those that have the courage to stand up and actually say, hey, look, I think that the science supports intelligent design, that there are, or that there are fundamental problems with evolution. A lot of these folks, especially those that are either seeking tenure, many times they're discriminated against when they do stand up. I would assume that in your efforts as a lawyer that you actually end up defending some of these folks. Can you tell us about, and they don't even have to be your cases. I know if they're an active case, you're limited on what you can say, but why don't you just tell our audience about, pick several of the most standoutish type stories that you can describe that reflect what happens to folk when they stand up, and then maybe how you've been able to help or not in cases that you've taken.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is very common that scientists that either support Darwinian or support intelligent design or challenge Darwinian evolution end up facing discrimination and persecution in the academy. And I've gotten involved with a number of cases at different levels, not always representing people directly, but certainly, following the cases and making public commentary. One case like that, this is from very recent memory, was the case of Professor Eric Hedin at Ball State University in Indiana a couple years ago. Basically, in 2013, he was teaching a university-approved interdisciplinary course where basically seniors would take a class on sort of science and society, and they looked at the evidence for the Big Bang, and they actually very strongly endorsed the Big Bang in the class, and they looked at some of this evidence for fine-tuning of the universe that we just talked about, very well-accepted science, and said, look, the universe, is finely tuned for life. And then towards the end of the class, he asked some of the bigger questions. Well, what does it mean? Is there evidence for intelligent design from the fact that the universe is so finely tuned for life? Well, this got the atheist lobby really angry. They do not like it when people talk about views that they disagree with. And so a very prominent evolutionary biologist named Jerry Coyne worked with the Freedom from Religion Foundation to send a nasty lawyer letter to Ball State telling them that they had to shut down Eric Dean's class. And unfortunately, that's exactly what the university did. Not only did they shut down his class where he was able to talk about the evidence for intelligent design, openly, but they actually ended up imposing a campus-wide speech code, which said the president issued a speech code across the entire university, which says that intelligent design may not be advocated or taught in their science classes. And so this is the travesty of the university sort of, bending over backwards to eagerly capitulate to the atheist lobby's intolerance of any views that, might be friendly to a theistic worldview. And this is sort of the world that we live in when it comes to academia. There's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of tolerance when it comes to non-Darwinian viewpoints.
So in any of these cases, have you ever gotten to argue the merits of intelligent design versus evolution? Has any court ever let you try that?
Well, there was a case in Pennsylvania that I was not personally, we were not a party to this case. This was in about 2005 in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, where a small school district, Dover area school district, adopted a policy requiring the teaching of intelligent design, and they got sued. Now, there's a whole backstory here that we probably don't have time to get into. But suffice to say, Discovery Institute, where I work, we opposed Dover's policy because it was very, very ill-conceived. It was poorly worded. The whole background of passing the policy was done in the wrong way. And so, unfortunately, they decided, based on the bad advice of another law firm, to go to court to defend their policy. But the worst part of the story was the judge's ruling basically ignored the actual definition of intelligent design. He didn't even really listen to what the intelligent design theorists were saying. I mean, he ruled that intelligent design proponents have never published any of their research in peer-reviewed journals. Well, that research was testified about in his trial, and he just ignored it in his ruling. So this is sort of the state of the legal system where you can provide facts that show that, what you're doing is science, that there is legitimate science backing you up, and then it's almost like you weren't even there saying it when the judge issues their ruling. They just ignore it. They just deny the facts that, black and white facts being presented to them. So I would say that was not a very good test of intelligent design because it so badly misrepresented what intelligent design is. And also it was a terrible fact pattern for you lawyers out there. You had a defendant who was defending intelligent design that frankly didn't know what they were doing. So that's a whole messy case. We could get into it and take a long time.
Well, I wish we could finally have a case where we could actually try the evidence. That would be a phenomenal thing to do. There was a law school alumna of the Yale Law School that wrote a 2-volume treatise on issues regarding evolution. It came out of the Louisiana creation science dispute. I guess this was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, Wendell Bird, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, very thorough. And, of course, this is a guy's top-notch lawyer. And, to just have courts and have academia reject this kind of evidence because of the prevailing winds is really devastating, I think, to American academics because you don't have a rational discourse. There's no dialogue. There's no learning. It's imposition from above. Really regrettable.
No, yeah.
But appreciate everything that you're doing, Casey. I'm sure that we'll have you back on to talk about some of these issues. Appreciate, though, the work that you and the Discovery Institute are doing on intelligent design and getting the good word out. Keep up the good work. We'll have you back. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Joe Miller Show. Stay with us. Chris Kobach, Secretary of State of Kansas, next.